Hi everybody, my name is Cindy Krum and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie based in Denver, Colorado. We do mobile SEO and ASO consulting, and today I am recording a presentation called Don't Blame It on Your Mum, which was originally presented in Mexico at SEMrush SummerJam, which was great, and I've gotten a lot of requests for it, so we're here recording it today. So this is Don't Blame It on Your Mum, and for those of you in the audience who are less familiar with me, like I said, my name's Cindy Krum, and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie. At MobileMoxie, we help people with mobile SEO and ASO, and we also have the first mobile SEO-focused tool set that's very forward-looking in terms of where Google is going, and I'll encourage you to try that out. But with that, I feel the need to explain that this presentation was done the week before Mother's Day. So it's Mother's Day themed because of Mom, so some of the jokes might not hit as well as they did originally. But I did remind people that Mother's Day was coming up and to not forget it. And then talked about what you might do with your mother if you want to take her out for a high tea or brunch. But in this presentation today, what we're looking at is sort of the tea leaves of what is Google telling us and what can we expect from Google coming forward in the future. And of course, the theme of the presentation was Mum for Mother's Day. So what about good old Mum? In Google's words, Mum stands for Multitask Unified Model. And what that means to them, I think, is it's Google's new technology for answering complex search queries. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, talking about how that's going to impact day-to-day SEO potentially in the future. And what you can see in this article that Google wrote about Mum, if you look into the pictures, they call it a new AI milestone for understanding information. And the pictures show you images and videos and text in a bunch of different languages. And I think that's important as a signal for what we can understand Mum to be. There's even topographical maps in there. And the idea, I think, is that Google is putting together a multimodal and multi-step approach to understanding and anticipating queries. And so Google made this example where it says, I've hiked, and it lists 2 mountains, and then it shows you related concepts about those mountains and what you might need to prepare for, how you might need to prepare, what you might need to buy, things like that. It's understanding the question and the most likely next questions or next needs. And I think that this Mum concept is really best understood in terms of entities and what I call entity first indexing. So if you guys aren't familiar with my work, obviously I've focused on mobile for a very long time. My company was started in 2008, and I even focused on mobile before that since about 2005, which is before the iPhone was a thing and before the App Store existed. So I've been around for a long time. And what I see is usually the trends of what is happening. And when Google launched mobile first indexing, I immediately questioned the title because it talks about indexing, but what the spokespeople were talking about were crawling. They talked about changing the primary crawler. But what I think really happened when Google switched to mobile first indexing was that not only did they change the crawler, which is something they did a lot, but they changed how they've organized their index. And not just looking at mobile first pages or mobile pages first per se, but looking at content and concepts in a different way, i.e. in a connected way based on entities rather than based on keywords. And some SEOs have a really hard time with understanding entities because we've focused so much on keywords for so long. But if you think about it, an entity is basically a concept and its relationship to other concepts. So it's like a keyword, except it happens before the keyword. And it's funny because even before I wrote a presentation that was focused on mothers, I would use the example that a mother is related to a father and related to a daughter and related to a son and a grandfather. In the same way, in every language, regardless of what language you're speaking or what words you're using to describe them, the relationships stay the same. And that's how entities work. So you can have an entity that's described in a bunch of languages. And this is what Google did to help with their machine learning, to say, if we understand this concept in one language, we can make some basic assumptions that it's true in other languages and advance our AI and our understanding and our algorithm faster by backing things away from being focused on one language at a time to being focused on entities, and then they can apply the knowledge to all of the different languages, or at least test the knowledge in all of the different languages. And so what Google was calling mobile-first indexing, I began calling entity-first indexing, because that's what I saw happening. And the other thing that is more obvious, if you're not an SEO, if you're just a digital marketer, what entity-first indexing and mobile-first indexing means to you is just a massive build-out of the knowledge graph. And I sometimes call it a land grab. Google is putting more and more information that they know in the search results and pushing organic search results down, not just from the top, but from the middle and the bottom too. They're squeezing them out by including other things in the search result that are not organic, and so they're not counted as a ranking position in Search Console, but they are getting lots of clicks because they're really interactive and visual. And so what that leads to is the search results feeling what I call more googly. There's just a lot more information in a search result that Google thinks you as a user or a searcher might benefit from. And I think in many cases, those googly search results are overshadowing and taking clicks away from organic search results. And so this land grab in building out the knowledge graph is happening more than just in knowledge graph results, but in a bunch of different kinds of results where Google has said, I understand this concept, here's maybe a knowledge graph, but here's some other things that are tied to our understanding of this concept that aren't actually the knowledge graph, but they're a result of Google's understanding in the knowledge graph of a concept. So for instance, Mother's Day. This year it was on May 8th. If we search for Mother's Day, Google understands this concept, but for Google, this is one where they understand that it can be different from one country to another. And so in the US, Mother's Day is May 8th, and it knew that I was searching from the US, so it showed this, but perhaps in another country, it would show a different date, because it says here Mother's Day of 2022 in the United States. It's being specific and saying, hey, we understand this concept, and yes, this concept exists in many countries, but it's not always on the same day. So here's a knowledge graph about Mother's Day and maybe its history and what it's about with a share link. Notice that triangular share link below the knowledge graph. That's important. But then also the top stories, and then below that are things where you can buy flowers and book events and local results related to Mother's Day in my area, because Google assumes that if I'm celebrating Mother's Day, perhaps it's in person, right? Most people celebrate in person. So since this talk is inspired by mothers, I know my mother loves animals, cats and dogs, but let's start with dogs. So this is an old search result for a dog. So this is about a year old, for a specific kind of breed, dog breed, called a flat coat retriever. And there's a lot of things in this search result that I want you to notice. Number one, notice the share link. They've decided that this search result is good enough to be a landing page, that it shows you enough information about this topic that it might become a destination that people share, rather than people sharing a link to a website. They say, this is really good, we really feel confident about this, share it. Use it as a destination. Beyond that, they have their own sub-navigation within this entity or within this concept. They have health information and diet and other things about this specific dog breed. So they're saying, hey, we know more than just a little. We've had to break it out into subtopics of this, this concept, this entity. And so here's a similar result, but for a cat. So this is a Siberian cat, and this is how they do that same result now, where they have the title, Siberian cat, it's a cat breed, and then they have the navigation now in filters along the top, the little orange bubbles. They have the knowledge graph on the right, just like they did for the dogs. They have some images, and then they have the first Wikipedia result with a bunch of cats in a carousel image there. So you can see there's a lot of stuff where Google is still showing how much it understands this result. And at the bottom you can even see that people also ask. It's saying, hey, people who search for Siberian cat, this is their most likely next query, or these are common queries, things that people want to know about a Siberian cat. It's saying, we really get this entity and we want to help you so that you don't even have to type the next query. We've got you. And when you start to search for something else, even in the drop down that happens from Siberian cat, you can see that they've included people also ask result there with more questions and more cat breed pictures where it's like, oh, maybe you want a related cat breed, not this particular cat breed. Don't worry, we're going to help you. You don't have to type anything. We think we know what's coming next. So that's interesting. But here's another example. And if I search for this, right after I search for the Siberian cat, I've searched for Russian blue, which is another kind of cat breed. Now, this may not happen to you a lot, but this is fascinating because what's happened is at the top, Google is remembering my previous strong entity query and this one, and it's highlighting that in a title where it says related to Russian blue and Siberian cat. Now this is the page for Russian blue, but it remembers that my most recent search before this was for a Siberian cat, but this one has nothing to do with that. This one is just a search for Russian blue. So what you can see from this, what Google is showing us, is that it's trying to understand the sequence of my searches and trying to serve the best results, not just for one search at a time, but for the sequence of searches. And that is a big, big deal, and that's a change. Google has talked about these kinds of searches, especially in voice, before. The example was years ago when Danny Sullivan at an SMX West talked about voice search for the Eiffel Tower, and you could say, tell me about the Eiffel Tower, how tall is it, and you didn't have to repeat Eiffel Tower. And now what we're seeing is that's coming into play in this entity understanding inspired type of sequential search result here, where they're trying to anticipate not just from this query, but from this query and a previous strong entity-oriented query. And this is important and related to MUM, but I think also, if you've missed it, Google has announced a couple other things that are deeply related to MUM. The biggest one is Google's what they call multi-search. So in that, you can see that they had a picture of an orange dress, and then they submit the picture of the orange dress and they say in green. So there's the orange dress, but they say in green. And Google is responding to that combination of a query and an image. And so according to Google, they're saying this goes beyond just the search box. This allows us to combine text queries with image queries, and Google can interpret the meaning of these two things together. This is monumental because you can see in this example, they've uploaded a picture of a bike wheel, and it says how to fix, and Google's responding with a video about how to fix that particular thing. And this is critical from an SEO perspective to see this coming, because realize that how to fix and this image are the only keywords that we get. And so if Google, in this case, didn't understand that that video was about this topic or this keyword or this entity and how to fix it, that video wouldn't have ranked. And so this, I think, is where we're going with MUM, and why it's so important is, as SEOs, we need to kind of prepare ourselves for a world where keywords might be optional, or keywords might be intuited from images, and keywords might be combined or built upon with images and text. And I know a lot of people, especially iPhone users, are less familiar with voice search, or not voice search, excuse me, visual search, and Google Lens and things like that. But if you haven't used it, I encourage you to try. On the right side of the slide, there's a tweet from Lily Ray showing how she used it. And she said she was a convert because she was traveling and she took a picture of something that she saw in a city that she was visiting to find out what it was, submitted it through Google Lens, and Google Lens identified it and showed other pictures of the same building. And so this is a huge opportunity for Google to expand their dominance in search, and I think that they very much intend to, because there's a lot that Google can learn from visual search, and especially with metadata coming from phones and mobile searches, perhaps they can get information about where the picture was taken geographically, and so they can add that in. Or maybe they're just matching based on purely image processing. Either way, this is a new kind of search that doesn't necessarily involve a written keyword query, and that's a big deal. Other things that you can do with visual search is translate things, and this gets us back to the entity concept. When Google understands things as an entity, it can understand it in all languages kind of at once, and that's a big deal. And similarly with Google Vision AI, they can identify that this is a picture not just of a dog or a mammal, but it's a vertebrate, and they can say that it's perhaps 98% confidence that they could guess the dog breed, that it's a retriever, that it's a carnivore. They can understand a lot of different things. And while MUM and Google Vision AI are two different things, I think one is related to the other. As Google's different intelligence or understanding algorithms come together to understand what's being submitted in an image, or what's being requested in a voice search, or what's being requested with a text search, what's the intent, they can combine those things to make a more meaningful and rich query and return a more meaningful and rich result. So this is why entity first indexing is so important, is they have to understand the entity to respond in a meaningful way with a search result that captures the entity but also captures the modifier, like how to fix, even if the keywords aren't necessarily present in a written way. And so in my best guess, I think that MUM seems to be trying to build out not just meaning within one submitted query, but also the natural next steps of a query. So you can think about that Mount Fuji example directly from Google. They're saying, you know, how do I prepare? What should I buy? What are the health risks? Stuff like that. It's not just searching for this, it's searching for that and understanding what is the most likely next step, and refining and adding modifiers to entities that Google understands really well. And so this is an image search, and what I want you to understand here is that Google finds specific value, I think, with MUM in identifying e-commerce style searches, because this is a search just for mom jeans, and it's an image search, but what you can see at the top is a bunch of different filters where Google's trying to anticipate how I might want to narrow this down. But notice that you get the filters, which would get you to another search result from Google that they've monetized with row 2, which is a row of ads, and then row 3, which is another organic images result, with people also ask, again, trying to encourage you to narrow down your search, but also to click to another page of Google results that they can monetize with more potential ad clicks, right? So Google is trying to use all of its assets, especially in this kind of a search, where they're highlighting which of these products or which of these images are product images, because they understand this as a product-oriented query. And in some ways, this landing page, this image search result, feels a bit like a category page, but it's a category page from a lot of different retailers. It's saying, you want mom jeans? Here's a bunch of mom jeans at a bunch of different prices from a bunch of different providers. Which one do you want to know more about? Or do you want to filter your search into something a bit more narrow? And so the other thing to understand is that these kinds of results do look different on mobile. And if you're not doing mobile searches and comparing desktop searches to mobile searches, you really should be. Because, for instance, in this, on the left, we have the mobile result and the filters are at the top. But on desktop, we have a disambiguation option that's not there in mobile to say, are you talking about mom jeans, the product, the fashion item, or are you talking about mom jeans, the band? Because there's apparently a band called Mom Jeans. But the filters are lower down, and so people are going to interact with this result potentially differently. And then, of course, in both cases, we have that top line of ads just below the filters on mobile and above the filters on desktop. So again, Google wants to be here with filters or to monetize it so that if you don't click on an ad, you're going to click on a filter that's going to get to another page where they can show you more ads. They really want to monetize these kinds of results. And they really want to understand what is going on. So on the left, you can see a scrolling of the mobile thing, and notice this kind of page looks very different. It's got the four square kinds of ads with star ratings. It's got more carousels, more images, brand names, and what looks like a lot of Merchant Center ads, but it does have that one famous Saturday Night Live video about mom jeans. But again, it's more and more opportunities for you to buy either directly from a store or from Google Merchant Center. And that last bit, you might have seen it go by, a mom jeans band video. So they're really trying hard to figure out, like, this is a broad query. What are you looking for? And again, another mom jeans band video. And then at the end, if you get all the way to the bottom, they don't say people related searches. They actually tell us straight out, people search for next. They've reworded this. So they know, or they think very much that you want to narrow this query down. And that this is too broad. You're not going to find what you want, maybe unless you narrow it down, because they gave you so many options to click on something, and if you didn't like any of those, maybe you need to narrow it down. And then, of course, I have to show you the SNL famous Mom Jeans video. Of course, very funny. But this is an important thing to understand, because even when you add your own refinements as a searcher, this one is similar but different, where we're searching this time for best mom jeans. Google stacks a bunch of ads for jeans at the top, even though they may now modify their understanding of the intent to say, oh, you're looking not just to buy mom jeans, you want to read some reviews or read a comparison or read a top 10 list, but still, Google can't resist, so they show the ads at the top. And so in this case, though, below the ads, they're trying to link you to connections or collection pages and found across the web, and trying to keep you in the search result by adding expanders and lots of images where you can do the expansion and then do another filter. Again, potentially Potentially because, at least in my opinion, they want to keep you in a search result as long as they can because they've monetized those. And once they get you to a website, they're making a lot less money. And of course, Google is a business and they still are there to make money. But if they can't make money, they're happy to take the data. They're happy to build on your query and say, okay, we might not make a dime on you today in money, but if you get to the bottom of a search result and you haven't clicked on anything, here are 3 possible refinements, and let's get some data out of this so Google can at least use your query as training data. They may not be able to make a dime, but they can at least make use it into data, or turn it into data that they can use. So in this one we have broaden this search, related searches, and then at the bottom more related searches, or best mom jeans for a category, best mom jeans from Zara, best Levi's mom jeans. So they add brands, or sometimes they'll add sizes, mom jeans for juniors. So they're if they can't get the money, they'll take the data, right? That's next best. And so you have to understand that Google is expecting users to feed their machine learning algorithms, whether they're clicking on ads or clicking on refinements. This is what's helping Google refine their understanding of language and their anticipation of what the most likely next query is going to be. And you know, SEOs joke a lot about voice search, but I've always been quite bullish on voice search. I think that voice search is, in the long run, going to change the way users behave and going to change the way we do SEO. And just to remember how heavily Google has invested in things like smart speakers and Google Assistant. They're slowly getting into everyone's day-to-day life, in their houses, in their phones, in their smart TVs, in their smart speakers. We have more and more opportunities to do voice searches. And even if we're not considering every time that we interact with a digital assistant as a search, Google does. Google counts even very specific requests like play XYZ song, or what time is Law and Order on. They may be easy searches, but they're still searches. You think it's easy for Google to return the right result on that, but perhaps it's not, because actually spoken language is quite confusing compared to other kinds of searches, and especially compared to written language. So this is a tweet from Marie Haynes, who's a brilliant SEO. My favorite tweet, she's really smart, lots of great tweets, but this one says, David just thought I was talking about a Mexican friend named Emmanuel Action. And of course, the joke is she was talking about an SEO manual action from Google, not a person named Emmanuel. And of course, my response to her at the bottom is, oh, I hate that guy. But this was funny, and this talks about, or it speaks to the idea of how hard it can be to process languages or to process the spoken word. But just believe that Google is getting better at it, and that they want to do it because they think that they can monetize it, they can make money there. And I do think it's very much part of the plan with Mum, because voice can add to a query without having to stand alone. Remember, it's multi-step, multi-modal, multi-step is what Mum really is. And remember also that Google is fighting with Amazon because they both want to crack the code of voice shopping pretty bad, because they think it's the lowest friction way to get people buying things on a regular basis, where they either might make all the money in the case of Amazon, or a lot of the money, or at least they get to take a cut. And remember, people joke and say, oh, well, there's no way anyone's going to be using my website to do a voice search. That's silly. That's ridiculous. Yeah, you're probably right. I don't even think Google necessarily wants people to interact by voice on your brand website. They want to do it on theirs. And that's why they're doing things like creating these popular product carousels, and by opening up Merchant Center to free listings, and by even adding in product listings into the map. they don't expect people to interact with your brand on your website through voice. They expect them to interact with them through Google for voice, because they think they can beat everyone to the punch and build it better and create a better, less friction transaction environment. And this one, especially with the map, is funny because of how aggressive it is in my mind. If you're already doing this kind of a search for mom jeans in maps, you probably want to go somewhere and buy the mom jeans. You want to try them on, but Google's doing like a last-ditch effort, like see what's in these stores, and they're showing a product carousel for the companies that have uploaded local product inventory in the maps. So again, it's the last attempt. Like, you could buy it online. Don't leave your house. And it's not that Google has a vested interest in you not leaving your house per se. Maybe they do, but they at least really want you to make a transaction through something that they've shown you as a user, because they either get some money, they get a cut of it, or if it's a free listing, they get some of the data. And what I want you to start thinking about is, we're used to thinking about the data that we get as SEOs from the perspective of an SEO, but maybe try also thinking about it from the perspective of Google. So this is some old data. I think it's 2020 from JumpTap, as I recall, and it talks about the click-through rate and how worldwide in 2020 the mobile click-through rate for organic searches is quite low. It's only 21.9%. And 77% of mobile searches are zero-click. But I want you to also look at the difference in that teeny tiny sliver at the top of mobile and desktop. That's paid click-through rate. And on desktop, it's about 2.78% of people are clicking on ads instead of organic, or instead of just not clicking. But it's even lower on mobile for Google. It's 0.79%. And that is a problem for Google, because if Google is making the money on the ads, and more people are searching on mobile, then they're not getting paid as much. And so I think this is why we have that narrative of Google trying to keep you in the results, filtering down, where they can potentially, if you filter one, you search and then filter 2 times, they've got 3 opportunities to show you an ad. Potentially, in their mind, they're tripling the potential for you to click on an ad. And even though it's small, when they triple the options in a mobile search result, then they get it back up to kind of even with at least desktop, even with what they're used to and what they've expected. So if you're a data-driven marketer and you're only looking at mobile saying, well, no one clicks through on mobile, so why should we care? I think that you're missing the point. Lots and lots of people search on mobile because it's convenient for them, because it's what they like. And we're not going to be able to get people to change their behavior and search on desktop as opposed to mobile just by not being there. If I sell mom jeans and I'm like, whatever, I don't care about mobile, I don't need to be there, the user's still going to probably search on mobile and either not click, or they're going to filter, which counts in this case as a not clicking on an organic or a paid result. They're going to filter. And if you're not there, they won't even know. And Google won't miss you either. They're just going to use the set of results as the set, as kind of a point of truth. This is what's available. So I always tell people, it's Google's game, and if you decide to take your ball and go home and say, I don't want to play, no one cares. Google doesn't care. Your customers don't care. They'll find a replacement. So just know that this increase in zero-click results that's happening is happening on desktop and mobile, but it's happening in a way that's going to change the results that you can expect to see in Search Console, and it's happening for a reason. It's happening because people are filtering, and that's counted as a zero-click, but also it's happening because people are sometimes getting the information that they need directly from a search result. Now, if you ask Google, they'll blame this decrease on click-throughs in people reformulating queries, which when people filter, that in Google's mind is a reformulated query, or people who are just looking up quick facts. They never intended really to search on a website or get to a website. If they could just get the fact, that's all they need. Or maybe they're finding local business details, and they're driving somewhere, or they're navigating directly to an app. So Google has lots of excuses of why there are so many zero-click searches, but I think the main one to focus on really is this reformulation of queries, which is kind of aka filtering and staying in the Googleverse longer, where Google has multiple bites at the apple to try and get you as a user to click on an ad. And so I feel like if you're missing your clicks and you're scared, you're like, why do the clicks keep going down? I'm improving position, or I'm maintaining position, but they're just gone, right? You're like this mom going, what? Where did they go, right? They're gone. And then you freak out, and then, oh, okay, this makes sense, because there are clicks. They're just clicks on filters and clicks on Google things. And yes, this is a hilarious video. She's lost her baby and the baby's in her arms the whole time. And that's kind of the point, is that the clicks are there. They're just not going to your website. They're going elsewhere. And where they're going is within the Googleverse. The Google universe, what I call the Googleverse. So you have to decide to say, okay, as an SEO, things are changing, and as SEOs, we as a group need to recognize that things are changing, and our strategies may have to be more inclusive of what's actually happening in the search results, rather than just kind of plugging our ears and going la 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 and closing our eyes and saying nothing's changed. A lot has changed in the way the search results look and the way users interact with them based on how they look. And so it's interesting because there's been so much effort put into mobile, but we know that Google's kind of backed up on AMP. And so you might ask yourself, well, why, if Google cares so much about mobile and they're trying to monetize mobile and they're trying to improve everything on mobile, why did they back off on AMP? And I think that this is another important concept that I wish more SEOs understood, is that Google did AMP for a reason, and it's served its purpose. So in my eyes, Google did AMP and made all the webmasters connect a fast version of the page to a slow version of the same page. And what Google learned from that is what makes pages fast and what makes pages slow, and what can they automate in Chrome to speed up slow pages, but also what was the biggest benefit that sped up AMP pages. And so I think that what they learned from the AMP experiment was things like the direct connection between the AMP cloud hosted assets is what really made the biggest difference. And so what we're seeing now is Google shift away from talking about AMP and some of the things they were talking about, and talking about these new things called signed exchanges. And you can see in this Google write-up, you can see it says that both AMP and non-AMP results show in Google Google search may prefetch key resources such as HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and images and fonts. So this was part of AMP, the prefetching of assets, and now they're saying, well, you don't have to do AMP, and it's not just mobile where we care about speed, we care about speed on desktop too, and maybe instead of pushing everyone towards AMP, they can just push everyone towards these signed exchanges. So this is, I think, where Google is going to be focusing a lot of their next energy. In getting people to get on board with signed exchanges. It's in very early days right now, but I think we can expect to see more of it. And this last quote is, while Google Search doesn't consider using signed exchanges, which is abbreviated SXG, doesn't consider using a signed exchange as a direct factor in ranking, the largest contentful paint may affect your rankings because page experience is a ranking factor. And so this again is hinting, and it's saying, well, it's not actually a ranking factor, but it may be a secondary ranking factor, because if you do this, you might rank better, and it's because we care about the things that this impacts. And so, of course, making a page faster because things can be prefetched or pre-rendered with this signed exchange or this secure connection, that's going to potentially have a ranking benefit. So I think we'll see more and more of that kind of thing, where Google is using what it learned from AMP and from other projects and applying that to incentivize the next thing that they want us to do. And that may also be related to this announcement, which just came out about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where Google is introducing their own media CDN, where they're saying, oh, if you pay Akamai or you pay AWS, we have a media CDN too, or maybe you pay Fastly or Cloudinary, any of those. We have one of those too, and it's modern and extensible, and why do stuff with someone else when you could just do stuff with us because you already care about Google a lot. So maybe there's a motive here, right? Maybe they're saying, oh, if we get lots of people to use the Google CDN and we call it a secure exchange, then maybe we'll get a lot of websites faster, and that'll be good for our users, and then, we'll be serving our purpose, right? So I think that there are a lot of things that may or may not be connected, but in this case it seems connected, and I think that we may see this media CDN playing out because we know that images and JavaScript and videos are what take the longest to load and what hurt page experience the most. And so I think that we may see a pivot from AMP, and so you have to be paying attention to watch and to notice stuff like that. But the point I want to make here is that I think mobile isn't what you think it is, or at least mobile in Google's eyes isn't what you think it is. Google was focused on AMP, and AMP was accelerated mobile pages, but maybe the mobility of it is a little bit different, because in my mind, when Google says mobile, I hear entity. Always, because to them, mobile means portable. Not just a mobile phone, but the portability of information, the portability of concepts. And that's why entity-first indexing is so critical for an understanding of mobile-first indexing, is that they separate not just mobile devices, but mobility of information, portability, and even cross-device aspects, where it's like, here is this information in video format, here's this information in image format, here's this information in written format or in audio format. That, I think, is often what Google means when they say mobile, or it's what's implied, kind of the subtext. And this understanding also makes sense in the larger understanding of what's happening in technology today. So in technology today, we've gone from building these monolithic applications to building what we call microservices, small little bits of code that do things instead of one big piece of code that does a lot of things, microservices that do a few things, to what's called FaaS, or function as a service, one at a time things, where you can say, I want to connect to this function and this function and this function, and everything is becoming an API that lives in the cloud. And I think that's the way that development is going, and that breaking down into the essential elements and into separate kind of pieces is exactly related to what's happening in search, believe it or not. So what I see happening in search is what I call tokenization of search, where it's not just that Google is looking to match a keyword with a page, they're looking to match a concept with a piece of a page or a piece of information. And so that's why we had all the kind of discussion of passages, is that Google can now break down, not just rank a page as a whole, but a section of a page as a whole. And if you don't remember, or if you haven't watched, I was talking about passages since 2018. So 3 years before they actually launched. I called them fraggles because to me they were a fragment of text and a handle or a jump link. And we saw this happening eventually with what Google called AMP highlighting in featured snippets. And you can see they've taken a featured snippet, and when you click through on this featured snippet, instead of just landing on a page, it would land you on the page and scroll to the piece of the page that answered the question. Now, that was really cool, but what's really interesting in this is the highlighting in orange on the page. You can see that they've lifted one sentence from the top, and then they've skipped some stuff, and then they've included the next sentence after that. So they're trying, in this case, so hard to really answer the question that they say, this is an answer, this is fluff, don't worry about this, and then this is also part of the answer. And that is really, really sophisticated compared to what some SEOs still think of Google as just like, oh, well, put the keyword on the page 10 times and you'll be there. No, this is a deeper understanding and a real attempt to match a question with an answer. And other parts of passages that I think are interesting that you see coming out more and more in the Google verse, or what Google is publishing, is the ability to link not just to a page, but to a section of a page. So this is an announcement from 2019. And people still aren't doing this very much, but you'll notice if you look at Google's documentation, they're doing it a lot, where people can link not just to the page, but to a heading on a page or to a piece of text on a page, and get people directly not just to the page, but to the section of the page. And I think, Google hasn't said this, but I think even if that's not a ranking signal per se, it's an understanding signal, where it's saying if I'm linking from my page that I'm writing about shoes to this section of a page that has shoes in the H2 that I link to, then this section is probably about similar shoes, right? They're breaking things up. They're breaking pages down into sections and concepts. But it's not just written word. They're already also doing this in video, and they call it clips markup, where you can put chapters and breakpoints into your videos so that people who are looking for a specific answer can fast forward to find that answer in the video. And you can do this manually, but even when Google announced this, and this was at 2021 Google I/O, as I recall, maybe 2020, they also announced seek markup, which is to say that they're saying, they told us in advance, we're gonna start marking these videos up and adding our own chapters if you don't do it. And so again, I think that the fact that Google lets you do it manually is another instance of Google letting users, and especially SEOs who are submitting content, so letting content creators create training data for their algorithms, because perhaps when they get enough people adding this seek markup, then they can start to process the way that videos look and feel and sound when there's a new topic or when there's a topic change. So I think that's why they're seeking those signals of a topic change in seek markup, which they'll do automatically and you won't have to do. So they're trying so hard to break things down into smaller pieces where they can find just the answer to a specific question. And that's also why we see things like Speakable Schema, which is FAQ, how-to, and Q&A. Google announced these and started showing special kinds of results in search results. If you had FAQ markup, or if you had how-to markup, or if you had Q&A markup, you would get a special presentation in the search results. But no one seemed to really tie this back to the concept that these were all under something called Speakable Schema, which makes it obvious to me, at least, that this is how Google wants to train its assistant in being able to better respond to questions with meaningful answers. And this makes sense because it would be a horrible response for a Google Assistant to read the entirety of a web page if you asked it a specific question. They just want to get you the answer, and so we have to break things down, break pages down, break videos down, break audio down into discrete, smaller pieces to be able to do that. So that's what I was calling the tokenization. And if you think that Google doesn't care about voice, or I haven't convinced you yet, just know that Google Duplex, their Google Assistant and Google Chatbot crawler, is already crawling the web looking for content, trying to understand and respond, or at least understand how it would respond, and how topics are relevant in a voice query. So there's a crawler already out there looking for good content to create assistant relevant answers, and potentially to build out their own kind of intense chatbot experience where the chatbot answers your question but can also anticipate your next question or your next need. And that's really where Mum comes in. So just know that the content that you're putting in whether it's video or text or audio, it's feeding that AI too. And that's a big deal. And so Google's playing with this AI in a lot of different ways. You might remember when Google started changing title tags. Maybe they're doing this to make things relevant to users who have maybe different focuses per country. So you can see in this case, I did the same search in 2 different countries and captured the title tags over time. And you can see for the US Open, they were testing different things at different times. So maybe they were trying to say, okay, let's make this title tag more relevant just for this country over this period of time. They're using the AI to do different things, like potentially in this case, and I think this is very telling, rewrite content. So this is very recent, April 21st of this year. People started noticing that the London knowledge graph wasn't from Wikipedia anymore. It was a description written by Google. And if Google can use AI to rewrite title tags or use AI to write a knowledge graph entry, perhaps there's a benefit in them for them, right? Why would they spend so much energy, development energy, AI energy to do that? Well, there's probably a reason. And maybe it's the fact that if they can claim that they're the author of some content, there's less pressure for them to show a link to another website and more opportunity for them to keep you in the Googleverse. If they wrote this, then they don't have to link to Wikipedia. So there's not a risk that you're going to click through on that Wikipedia listing because the Wikipedia listing isn't there anymore, even though it used to be. The most likely thing you would click through on that London knowledge graph is perhaps weather.com, where it talks about the London weather that day, or perhaps the link in the population that's coming from Eurostar. But those are potentially less good results, and they tell you less about London than a Wikipedia link might. But this keeps you in the Googleverse. Now, the other thing that can happen when they use AI is they can remix content that they host. And this is an example of an AMP story that comes from a knowledge graph navigation, in this case for Steve Irwin. So this used to be part of his knowledge graph, and it takes pictures and text and information that it gathers from over the web and rewrites it into this slideshow experience that you can link to. And this is a Google slideshow created thing, not a user created thing. And they offer, you can stay and see one for Elon Musk or someone else. But this, again, is AI created content that Google didn't necessarily have to pay someone to create. They just use their AI, and this keeps you in the Googleverse. And in that case, they were citing some sources, but potentially if they rewrite enough content or recombine enough content, maybe they don't have to. And that's a scary potential. But when you look at other things that Google's testing, like in this example that Jason posted, he did a query for how much money should I spend on advertising, and the first thing that shows up is not an organic result, it's not an answer, it's not a knowledge graph, it's a list of articles in found from the web format. And it's just giving you the smallest possible quote, 6 to 8%, 2 to 5%, 5 to 7%, 2 to 10%. And so you get to see kind of a synopsis of what the articles are saying without you having to click through to read and scour and, do a Control F for that percent sign. You don't have to do that now because Google has lifted an even smaller portion than they might in a answer or in a knowledge graph, right? So Google really is trying to see what can they get away with. Now here, of course, they're giving credit, that's great, but they're also giving you enough that you might not feel the need to click through on any of those articles. And so scraped, rewritten, recombined AI driven content in the SERPs is one way I think that Google can make money and keep people in the SERPs, but I also think we have to look at their larger picture and stuff that's happening in the EU with antitrust litigation and the thing that happened where Google didn't show news headlines and images for a while because the news publishers said they were upset that Google was lifting their content. Of course, that didn't work out, right? What happened in that case, traffic to all of the news publishers went down 45% when in the EU they stopped showing the headlines and the images. And so the news publishers changed their mind and they said, oh, I guess it is okay for you to show those things because we at least do get some of the clicks. And I think that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in now, or that we will more and more in the future, is that it's Google's game, and they're going to do what they want to do, and to be there and to get the clicks, any clicks, we have to play the game. And so let's think about that more in a slightly more strategic way about the future and what can you expect from MUM. Now, I'll say again, this presentation is speculation. I don't have secret knowledge. I'm showing you the proof that I have, or the indications that I have that led me to some of these conclusions. But I usually focus on where's Google spending their money and time, and what are their biggest projects. And what we know as SEOs is one of the biggest projects happening at Google right now is this forced transition to Google Analytics 4, GA4. And this is interesting because we don't see stuff like this happening a lot, that they say, no, you can't use that old product, we're going to retire it, you're going to have to use this new product. The last time we saw a full overhaul was with Google Search Console, where there was old Google Search Console and now there's new Search Console, and it wasn't a modification or an improvement, it was a whole new thing. And this happened just before mobile first indexing launched. And I, at that time, thought they were connected, and at this time, I think that this push from Universal Analytics to GA4 is also related to the larger aspect of MUM and of what Google sees as the future of search. And similarly, I think things that Google is trying to do with this discontinuing the Google sign-in through their JavaScript platform, they're saying you have to use this new sign-in that's not JavaScript, it's handled slightly differently, and that's because they want that as part of their larger vision into the web and their larger way of connecting experiences with connected logins. That's potentially going to make it harder for companies and for Google to get an overall understanding of where users are going on the web, and potentially anonymizing that data together to say users like this do things like this, so that they can sell that data in a legal way that doesn't violate privacy. Because remember, UA4 was really bad at cross-device and cross-channel attribution, and it seems like if you read what Google is writing about GA4, that's what they want to solve for, is they want to have a much better way of attributing cross-device and cross-channel communication, where if someone clicks on a PPC ad and then clicks on an organic result or goes to a store or anything like that, Google can at least model that and use AI to put that kind of modeled information, anonymized, into its projections, potentially into other tools or into PPC types of things. So by making GA4 more about specific more about user interactions and how users interact across the web, potentially with that their newer single sign-on, they might be able to get all that data, anonymize it, model it, but also just allowing digital marketers and cross-device digital marketers and cross-channel digital marketers who are working with apps and websites and videos and stuff like that, the potential to see a more unified picture, because I think that also is the reality that we're facing in SEO, is people are clicking not just on our website, that Google is rewarding brands and companies for having content across the web on YouTube, on Twitter, on Reddit, on different forums, and all of those are part of the user experience. And so Google wants to help model that and report on that. So in GA4, each event or each thing that happens has two events where Universal Analytics would just have one. So they have an engagement event, which is something Google has always cared about, and then a view event. And so the view event is kind of more like what we're used to, but the engagement event is a lot about what did they do when they got there, not just how did they arrive, but did they have a transaction? What was the value? What was the product? And how well is the website actually serving users' needs? The other important thing to understand as an SEO is that GA4 includes the ability to count virtual page views, which when I saw this, I just panicked. Like, what the heck? Are they considering a virtual page view? And should I just have lots of virtual page views? Is that as good as having a page view? And this speaks to how the web is evolving with more JavaScript and more infinite scroll and stuff like that, where it's saying not just if you click from one page to another do you get credit, but if there's a state change on your page, that's considered a page view, or if there's any page refresh or a change in the history state using the history API to have the back button. So that's making websites in this way a bit more like apps, where you don't actually have to have a new URL that occurs in the address bar to potentially have an additional page view or an additional trackable interaction. And so that's a huge benefit, I think, for the concepts of cross-device and cross-channel attribution, but I do understand why users are so upset. But the other thing to keep in the back of your mind is that GA4 looks a lot more like Firebase Analytics in the way that Firebase Analytics tracks things for apps. And so I think, again, what we're getting is this merging of the app and the web world, where Google sees that there's a lot of things that are being repeated between apps and websites in terms of effort, and potentially this is going to make it easier for Google to push people to do progressive web apps, or to help websites that only have help brands that only have apps integrate with other kinds of web data or web ads or stuff like that, to say how did they ultimately get there when they interacted not just on a website or not just on an app, but across the web. And the other thing that's happening that SEOs might have missed is this Google Web Packager, which has a new meta tag that's called supported media. Now, this is super in the weeds, I know, and I apologize, but what you can see, this is a GitHub repository, and it's created by a Googler who, no coincidence, worked a lot on signed exchanges. But with this meta tag that's only being, it's not, I think, fully accepted, it's being suggested right now. With this meta tag, it looks like this, and it feels like we're going back to 1995, because we're tagging one piece of media for mobile, for use on a mobile-only page, and another, the same piece of media in a different version for desktop-only pages. And what you see here is that we're saying, oh, we're doing it by the width. So if the width of the screen that's requesting this is this size or smaller, use the mobile version, and if it's this size or bigger, use the desktop version. Now, why would Google go so far back when we used to do stuff like this back when .mobies were still a thing, or at least when mobile subdomains were the big thing that Google wanted us to do? Why would we do this? It feels almost like the bidirectional canonical tags of M.dot websites from back in the day. So why would we do this? Well, it's because more and more devices are being used to show the same content. So think about things like smart TVs or smart speakers, and not all of those have the same capabilities. So other things that they're allowing you to specify with this context that they don't talk about as much, but they talk about, is it just a screen? Can this screen hover? Is there a pointer? And so think about things like a TV. There's not a pointer and you can't hover. Think about things like a phone or a touch screen Google Assistant device. You can't hover. There's no pointer. It's either you're touching it or you're not. And so Google wants to allow companies, I think, in the long run to be able to say, if it's shown on a device that's not hover capable, show this, and if it's shown on one that is, show this, or any of the other combinations therein. But also remember, perhaps they're going to set up their new CDN to specifically handle scenarios like this, to help users and to help make sure that they're doing a good job of learning where are certain kinds of content being requested and modifying that content on the fly based on what kind of a device it is. You know, maybe that's part of this plan as well. Who knows? But other things to look at, again, on the web package server, which is what that meta tag is part of, is it says that they should forward signed exchanged requests in this web package server. Recommendations contain more information on running web package server found behind a front end edge server. So this is again saying we can handle your media. It's going to be a signed exchange, and that's going to make things super duper fast. And again, reading the highlighting here, Google cares a lot about the future of signed exchanges. It seems there is a lot of documentation about that on web.dev, but specifically they talk about making content truly portable, and they say in the long term, truly portable content can be utilized to achieve use cases like a fully offline experience, which is something that Google talked about with progressive web apps. So again, there are signs of how things are coming together, even if Google isn't being super clear. But also read that last sentence in this article from Google. It says Google search will now crawl, cache, and pre-fetch signed exchange content when applicable. Now again, if you read the details, you're going to find that it's really hard to get set up with a signed exchange with Google, but potentially as the CDN becomes more available, that'll be something that's part of it that's easier. So I know that was dense, and I'm sorry. So what else? What else? More speculation. There are people, Google's been getting in trouble with privacy a lot. So some people are writing about a security.txt, which is kind of like your robot.txt, but it's a security text file that you can put at the root of your website. And it looks like this. So potentially this might be another signal that you listen to Google and you care about Google, and if you've got a security.txt, maybe that's going to be a signal from Google that you really care and that you should rank and that you're high quality. Who knows? Again, speculation. But these are things that are happening in the web development communities that you can pay attention to as an SEO. So what can you do? There's a lot of information. I know some of it might feel overwhelming, but what can you do? So let's start by saying, think like your mom. Be versatile. Don't put all of your content in one place, but have content across the web, on YouTube, different kinds of content. Have great videos, have great images, have audio podcasts, and be where your customers are. And think like your mom in terms of paying attention to details. Notice when Google is crawling as a mobile phone, if they're getting different content by looking at diff checkers to show what is the rendered versus unrendered HTML and what might they be getting in the first pass and the second pass of indexing, and making sure that you're doing a good job of optimizing both. And making sure that the mobile versions of your pages are well optimized, especially as things are moving to the cloud. If you're using cloud functions to determine what's being sent to a mobile phone versus desktop, make sure you're validating that by actually looking at mobile phone code, rendered and unrendered, to make sure that someone on a different team hasn't overwritten your Edge SEO rules or what have you. Think like your mom and know when things change. Pay attention to your own websites. Know that if you're having lots of outages, if you have security issues, if it looks like there's malware, if it looks like you've been hacked, Google's not going to want to show you because in a search result, because they get in trouble for that if they're sending too many people to a site that's down, or a site that's been hacked, or a site that's somehow compromised. And then think like your mom in terms of focusing on what you can influence. If you're a brand new teeny tiny site trying to rank on a really competitive keyword, pushing as hard as you can to get your teeny tiny brand new site to rank might just wear you down and hurt your soul. Maybe it's going to be easier for you to get things to rank in YouTube, or get things to rank in Stitcher, or get things to rank in Google Play, or in Twitter. Using big platforms that have a lot of SEO value and rank easily already might be the way to get started, because they're easier to influence because you're not building from scratch. So get on shared channels, get interviewed on a YouTube channel that already has a lot of viewers, or participate in things on the web where there's already an audience, and then use that to build links and influence and to get your brand name out there. And don't just keep pushing on something like building up a brand new website that's gonna take a while to build up. You should do it, you can't ignore it, but you also need to be realistic and think about what can you reasonably influence and how quickly, and organize your strategy according to that. If you're trying to rank on the most competitive keyword in your industry and you're brand new, that's tough. So maybe focus on smaller keywords, focus on less competitive keywords until you build up the ability to have more influence. So be reasonable and think about what you can influence. And then last of all, think like your mom in terms of focusing on what is possible. Look at what's ranking already for the queries that you want, and figure out how could you be there, and how could you replicate or do a great job, or create content that's as good as what's in position 1, 2, or 3, or that's as good or as useful as what Google is lifting into the search result. That way you at least get your content lifted into the search result and the potential for someone to click. Because again, you can't just take your ball and go home. You have to play, and it's their game, so you're playing by their rules. And if they lift your content, that's at least you getting the visibility that you weren't getting before. So you need to take it and appreciate it. And just know that a lot of things are happening in the search results, so you have to celebrate all your success, not just the success of the main website, but as SEOs, we need to be getting credit for everything that we influence on the search results. So start tracking, how often, not just is your main website ranking and how much space is it taking up in the search result, but if you have a knowledge graph in that search result, if you have a Twitter carousel in that search result, you should be, as an SEO, you should be part of those conversations, working with those teams. If not, if you're the only SEO and there's no social person, that might be part of your role to get the visibility in the search result. But you need to celebrate that success, and you need to be showing it to your bosses to say, hey, our website's still building up rankings, but we have rankings on this website, and this website. And it's not our website, but we have our content, our branding, our information, and our message, and that's a success too. And resist the urge to do something dangerous or to just give up. Think like your mom, stick it out, you're tough, and just because it feels like something might be lost, like this woman, again, like the baby, going, gosh, where did that broom go? Where is it, over there? That's how some of us, I think, have recently been feeling about our clicks. And so you have to remember, they might not just be gone. They're probably still there. They're just going other places. They're going to filters, or they're going to the things that Google is deciding to show at the top. And so we have to be there. The game is changing, and even as confusing as this guy makes it look, where did that darn broom go? Is he going to find it? Hold on. Think about this as your clicks. When your bosses are going, well, why we've maintained position? Why are we losing clicks? It's this. They're still there. We just have to update our thinking and find them, like the broom. So that's the presentation. There is a promo code. We have tools that will help you see the entirety of the SERP, to claim the credit, to understand what you're up against, to see what search results look like when you're not there, to see the knowledge graph, all of that. You can try out our tools with the promo code SummerJam 2022. That gives you a 30-day free account. You can also test your landing pages with that mobile diff checker, especially great if you're doing Edge SEO. And then after the free month, it's only $30. So I think it's super useful, and I appreciate your attention. I know this has been a long, deep, heavy presentation, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.